Okay, good morning, everyone. It is 9:35, and I'd like to call the meeting to order this morning. Before we get started this morning, though, I just want to say a couple of words, I guess. I would like to offer congratulations to Councillor Bazarowicz, who last week, I believe it was, June the 3rd, received a fire service pin for 35 years fire service. There was a banquet in Steinbach, and I think Glenn was back to attend that. And I know that we have a number of firemen in our departments that have received their 25-year pins or medals, and Councillor Bazarowicz had received his 35-year medal on June the 3rd. So let us offer him congratulations.
Thanks for the invite.
That was the most.
1988, somewhere in there.
1888.
84.
Okay.
825.
Okay, so with that, I will ask for a resolution for the adoption of the agenda, please.
Resolve the agenda for the meeting be adopted as circulated with the noted additions. New other business 6.6 leadership training.
Can I move it, please? Councillor Bazarowicz, second. Councillor Sutherland. Any other additions or deletions to the agenda for today's meeting? Here, go ahead.
I don't know if it's on there, it just, what the Island Beach as far as the grass cutting.
I think it might be on there. If not, I know that Councillor Horgus had mentioned it, and I believe that it was put on the agenda. If not, we can
I
put it
didn't
on
see
at the end.
Okay, thanks.
I thought it was on
I think I put the stairs thing on.
The stairs.
thing.
there. Oh, okay.
But I don't think I sent the email about the thing that we got about the grass cutting, but I don't think I put it on the agenda.
Okay, we can talk about it a little bit later. Okay, so we have the one addition, so with that, I have a mover, I have a seconder. If there's nothing else, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. We have one set of minutes for confirmation, and that is our regular meeting minutes for May the 23rd. If I could have the resolution, please.
Resolve the meetings, the minutes of the May 23rd, 2023 regular meeting of council be adopted as presented.
Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Horvis, Councillor Spicer seconds. Any discussion on the minutes, any corrections or deletions, additions? Go ahead, Councillor Strang.
One of the things that I would like to see is, I was looking at the minutes, and on our communication for information, we have a whole list of different things, and I know that the CAO gives us an update on the Henderson Sewer Project and the community center down south. I would just like, even if it's a one line, just to have a little blurb there to let the residents know if they're looking at the minutes that we did discuss it. So there is nothing in this, but I know we did have a discussion about it at the time. I know if they're watching the video that they can put it on, but.
So are they not listed in the minutes?
No, no,
Okay.
but just something that we
Right.
spoke about it
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
The other possibility is you could just put CAO report, because I think the last meeting, they were both in your report, right?
They were both in the report and they were in the communication for information. And we had determined that we would include them in communication for information. We got this time.
That's okay.
Okay, anything else with the minutes then? Hearing and seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Okay. I believe our delegation is here, and it is a little bit before 9:45, but if we want to get going, if Mr. Van Wellingham is wanting to address council, you can come forward now if you're prepared to.
I'm not Mr. Van Wellingham.
Oh,
He's at
okay.
he's coming in a moment.
Oh, okay.
He's just at the front
Sorry
door.
about that. Were you here just to listen, or were you here for another topic?
I'm here to listen and another topic, but I'm not on the agenda for today.
Okay. Okay. So So, Mr. Van Wellingham, are you prepared to do your presentation to council at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so just come forward to the podium.
Basically, I just had some questions. The first question I had was in regards to Sunday shooting at the Hubertus Gun Club.
Okay.
So I noticed that there's numerous events, Sunday events planned again. And I'm just curious as to how this is continuing when we continually ask for no Sunday shooting, and then you guys say, yeah, that's doable. And then as soon as I leave, there's more Sunday shooting events planned. So I was wondering how that, can you explain that, why that continues?
Do you have any information on that, or?
I think it would be, Madam Mayor, if I can suggest that
Sure.
Mr. Van Wellingham could bring up all his items as a delegation, and then we'll address them one at a
Sure.
time with administration.
Okay, so the first one then would be the Sunday shooting.
Right.
Okay.
The second one would be the St. Hubertus Gun Club water testing. I've been trying to find information in regards to that since last June. I had some emails that referred me to other people who couldn't provide the information, and eventually correspondence just stopped coming from you guys. So I'm wondering what's happening with the water testing. I'm also would like to inquire about the just shy of $10,000 that was given to the gun club for purchasing crate pigeons. I'm not sure how that's something the council should be part of providing operating costs for that, so I'd like to inquire about that. And then my friend could probably speak to it better than I can, but we're inquiring about our rights of freedom of religion to practice our ceremonies on Sundays free of obstruction of the sound that we get from the gun club. And that's the 4 items I have.
Okay. So do you want to go on?
Sure,
I think
if,
you and Tyler have been working
yes.
on these issues, so.
So to speak, and Tyler's here to answer further questions. As related to the Sunday shootings or Sunday events that were listed on their calendar, my understanding is that the gun club or their members have identified a calendar with events that are happening all over the place, not specifically at their location.
Mm-hmm.
They were just events that were happening that they're letting all their members know about if they need to go somewhere else. So these were not specific events happening at this site. Since then, the gun club has said that in order to avoid any confusion, they have removed those events. That was not the intent to have any Sunday shootings there. Any approval of their Sunday shootings as per council resolution is what they're allowed to have, and they haven't deviated from that.
Can you elaborate, because I'm confused, so they do have Sunday shooting events planned, is that correct?
Yes, Tyler, which ones do they have planned?
Yeah, so if you look on the calendar, as of right now, even a couple weeks ago when I looked into it, June 25th and October 22nd, it says shooting at St. Hubertus Range.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at every one of the other events, the other 9, they'll say shooting event at BGFR, that's Brandon.
Right.
So it indicates each one. So when you made that accusation, I looked into it, talked to the range, and it was clarified that there are all these events, but only 2 of them say at St. Hubertus Range.
Right, so I further looked into it, and I noticed that some of the events were not at the gun club. But I noticed some of the events don't specify exactly where they are. It just says that there's an event. It's unclear. There's a few that are just kind of unclear. And then there's a few that we know are at the gun club. But the last time that I was here, and I remember playing a sound bite here, and it seemed that you guys were on board were saying, 6 days a week shooting was plain enough, and that we should have at least 1 day of quiet. And then not long after I left, there was more Sunday shooting events. So why is it that we can't get 1 day away from that in the summertime? Why do we have to continually ask for this?
specific days of specific events, they were requested at the beginning of every year, and they have to give up another day during that week, and it's usually the Saturday, as I understand.
Yeah, it's one day during that week, yeah,
And so that comes forward as per what their original approval was, my understanding, and as per the original approval, they're allowed 6 days, and if they choose to do one on a specific Sunday, then they have to give up another day. So there is 6 days still, and they sometimes have special events for charitable occasion and so forth, so they were required to come forward to council and make that request at the beginning of every year.
I'm curious, just to put this out there, so if there was a nice big white church planted next to the property next to that gun club, and they only do their ceremonies on Sundays, would you still be granting these guys Sunday shooting next to a church?
It would depend if the church was there before or if it was done, if it came in after. The issue I understand is they came forward many years ago and they received this approval.
Right.
And the approval existed. So if, as an example, if somebody came in and got an approval to do something that they're allowed to do 6 days a week or 7 days a week, whatever it is, and somebody comes in after, like a church comes in there after, they don't lose their right just because the church came in there after.
Well, if we're allowed to use that argument, then why would we put a gun club next to residential properties in the first place? When that came up, people were asking why we don't want a gun club next to our houses. But you guys granted that anyways.
So, Madam Mayor, if I can.
Go right ahead, please.
Sir, I can't get into a debate about an issue that it was a public hearing and a public process that occurred many years ago. Approval was given. I can't change that.
But the residents were there, as you say, before.
The residents, some of those residents were there before. They had their chance to express their opinion, as in many land use related issues, and a decision is made of council. I can't go back and determine what were the dialogue or the discussions and what happened and how council and which council approved it, but the approval has been given. And so what we're doing is making sure that they're staying within the bounds of those approvals.
Can I make a comment on that?
If you state your name for the record, and we will let you have a couple of comments, but
Okay,
as
thank
you
you.
said, you're not on the agenda,
That's correct.
so.
My name is Bruce Schacht, S-C-H-A-C-H-T, and I'm a resident on Road 85. I live adjacent to the gun club. So when the gun club was first given the permission to operate there, and it continues, is my understanding, it's a conditional use permit. And there are a number of requirements on the part of the gun club as per the conditional use aspect of it. So the gun club has not actually followed the terms of the conditional use permit, but there hasn't really been any sort of oversight by council on that matter. And I personally have brought that to the attention of council. For example, they moved a building in there, they built structures in there, they didn't get building permits, moving permits as per required on the conditional use permit. That was the stipulation. When I brought it to the attention of council, at that time, and this is going back 20 odd years, council basically just gave them the opportunity to get the permits after the fact.
Can I comment on that, please?
Sure.
There are numerous people in this municipality that put up structures or bring in structures without permits. They usually are charged 2 or 3 times the permit fee, but they can get them after the fact through regular planning.
Yeah.
It's not something that council says, yeah, okay, you can do that. There is a process to be followed.
I understand that.
Yeah, but you're saying that they just did it. Well, they might have just done it, but if they got approvals after the fact, they would have paid more than they should have if they would have got their permit ahead of time to put a building on that property.
I don't see how that's relevant, because the aspect of a conditional use permit is that you have the right to do this as long as you follow the rules. They didn't follow the rules, and that's just one example, but
There are
there's a number-
numerous people in this municipality that don't follow the rules, and they are given the opportunity to rectify.
But they're not
the
doing it
wrongdoing,
under a conditional
so to
use
speak.
permit though. That's a different thing. I mean, I don't see how you can compare that.
Go ahead.
If I could, you're correct. Conditional use, if a conditional use permit is required, there is a requirement of a certain amount of oversight. And when something happens, it goes through a bylaw enforcement process. Every person has an opportunity to rectify, and if it was something that was not rectified as part of the bylaw enforcement process, then they are then charged. Sometimes conditional uses, and you're going back 20 years.
Yeah, I know, that's
And
true.
so sometimes in 20 years they weren't, and there's been changes that many councils and things have changed where they will put conditional uses where they will review on a every 5 years, every 10 years, or it's limited use, and those types of things are added as part of the conditional use. This 20 years or plus ago wasn't put in there. And so what we're doing is staying within the bounds of that. Bylaw enforcement, every person, when it says that you must do this, it's no different than when they're saying in the conditional use that you must require permits to be able to do this, or you must have permission to be able to do this. If somebody, it's, as the mayor has said, people sometimes inadvertently, purposefully, or whatever the reason, go against those rules, and then what happens is we go in and do a bylaw enforcement, which means they're fined, they're charged, and if the situation is not rectified, they have to remove it. As an example, if somebody put up a shed that wasn't meeting building code, then it's required. And these are all under legislation at a higher level than the municipal level.
Okay.
This is under provincial legislation.
Okay, so and I don't want to sidetrack Mr. Van Lauwerkamp. My comment is moving towards the idea that the things that the council is putting in place in regards to the gun club, a lot of them are not even enforceable. And you know, there's issues with that, like you know, like you guys here at this council stated that the gun club would be providing water samples. You know, the concern of lead shot in that area over all of those years affecting the groundwater. And the council said, well, we're going to require them to submit water testing. Hasn't been done. I don't think there's been a single submission. Yeah.
Mr. Glenn,
Yeah,
I haven't addressed that issue yet.
Okay, and then the other quick one I just want to say is, the other one was all of the traffic, especially with the events. So when we brought that to your attention, you went, and I'm saying you as a council, not you specifically, of course. The council went to the gun club and addressed that concern. The gun club said, okay, we'll carpool. That's it. That's the end of it. And so do you know that they've been carpooling? Because I could pretty much tell you that they haven't been.
So when let's address that, and then we'll get back to Mr. Van Wellingham's questions. Was the traffic identified as part of the conditional use?
Traffic is an issue identified by the residents.
Yes, so it's after the fact. As I stated earlier, there are stipulations associated with the conditional use. Residents identify traffic-related issues with that. Our bylaw enforcement went there and talked to them, and they said that they would look at minimizing it. And that's the best we can do. We cannot, there's a certain amount of level of legislative authority we do have.
Okay.
You know, and so the intent always is to try to get cooperation from the property owner. Just like if somebody had a, let's say, a commercial business, or as you mentioned earlier about a church showing up, and the residents started, the church has been approved, it's got all the approvals to be able to do it, to function as a church, and the residents start complaining about traffic, we would go and talk to the church and ask for some sort of voluntary compliance to be able to manage the traffic, but that's the most we could do.
Okay.
The roads are designed for traffic, and we tried our best. Now, if a conditional use is coming forward today, as an example, and then and council passes a resolution saying traffic must be minimized, or it's hard to sort of determine. the
I
traffic
understand.
You can appreciate.
Yeah, no, and thank you for
Van Willingham's question, which is related with because we've got to look through all our records going back from previous times and through various administration changes, council changes, and so forth. And this is an apology from me to Mr. Van Willingham. I was going to write you a letter to tell you that we weren't able to find any records. So somehow it did slip through the cracks, that there wasn't that level of oversight that was brought up earlier. Since then, we have brought it back to council. And that's why my letter was going to state that, yes, council has directed that starting immediately, we will be asking every year, and we're going to make sure that we put something on our files to make sure that this doesn't happen. I'll take responsibility for the administration, what happened 20 years ago and why it didn't get changed.
it wasn't that long ago, but, okay.
Yeah,
So what does that tell us about the gun club? Then if you have requested that from them and they were unable to provide you any, what does that tell us?
There's been some back and forth. You remember what you were told, there was some discussion as to, was there an amendment to that decision, or later on in council we weren't able to find it. So I don't know whether there's been a miscommunication or what happened. At this point, when we contacted them, they said they weren't aware that they had to do it. Whoever is the current manager, as you know, their current management has changed, and they had no issues in being able to provide that and continue to provide it. And so they said that they would, the manager said that he would make sure that he also put something in their files to make sure that none of this sort of slips through the cracks. And your third question, which is related to funding that was received from the Selkirk District Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So as any group, any not-for-profit groups can go out and make application for funding.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that. This is not something that council authorizes or is directly related with council. The Selkirk District Foundation receives requests from various groups requesting for support and funding as they are, and they make a decision as part of their plan.
So I had found that information through looking at the council meeting minutes. And if I remember correctly, that you had granted that for them to be able to do that.
We grant the funds to the Selkirk District Foundation, generally speaking, not for any specific project. So what council does is it authorizes, and it's been doing this for many, many years, it provides funding for various groups, and Selkirk District Foundation is one of those groups, and then they bundle the funding they receive from the municipality as well as from City of Selkirk, any other contributors, and then the foundation then determines where they will put funds out.
Who oversees the Selkirk Foundation, that community foundation?
It's a board, and
It's
they
a
have
board.
their own office. They have their own administration.
So when I looked into their mission statements and policies and that, it said that they are not supposed to provide funds to any organization for their operating costs. I'm pretty sure that clay pigeons is probably one of the major operating costs for the gun club.
It can be something we brought up with the board, to see if it was against their regulations, but I'm assuming the board went through their review and they made the determination as to.
I'm just saying that's what it says on their own website.
I appreciate it, that's your interpretation, and then the board has their interpretation as to how they apply their policies. I can't speak to you, and the council can't speak to any of that.
Okay, so who does one contact then? Because when I tried to contact the Selkirk Community Foundation, there wasn't anybody there that would respond to any emails. So any idea how we can contact that organization?
Contact the city.
Either the city of Selkirk or the Selkirk and District Community Foundation has their own email address. If you send something to them, someone will get back to you because they do have, I think, 3 or 4 administrative people that do work for the.
Right, I contacted, I think, 2 different people there, just to, say hello and, was there any chance of having a conversation? And I never got a response from either one of them, so. Just, when we were talking about the 20 years of the gun club stuff we've been dealing with, it just while you guys were talking, it struck me as for 20 years, the residents of that area have been asking for no Sunday shooting. And here we are 20 years later, still asking for no Sunday shooting. And I don't know why we have to trade Saturdays or Wednesdays or whatever. Why can't we just have no Sunday shooting? Give us a break. We're residents who've been living there for a long time. We were there before the gun club was there. We're just asking for no Sunday shooting. Why is that such a difficult ask? 1 day a week.
My understanding is 20 years ago, when the approval was made, they were allowed to switch Sundays. They were allowed 6 days of shooting. And so council can review, and they've allowed for 2 out of the, this year. And that's, and I guess next year, when they come forward for identification of those 1 or 2 days, or whatever number of days that they request, at that point, there'll be an opportunity to present, and then it goes through on a yearly basis.
Okay. And our last point, or 4th point?
I'm not sure how I can answer freedom of religion and Sunday shooting.
I've made if I may, I made a submission to council for the next meeting on that point, and I articulated the argument that we have, and I'm prepared to speak to it at the next meeting.
Sure. At this point, I'll ask our legal to review your submission, and then we can speak to it at the next meeting.
That way it gives everybody time to kind of digest it a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess that's concluded for me.
Thank you very much, and we'll look at some of those points, and as the administrator has said, the Sunday shooting, they do have to come forward every year, so we will look at that when it comes forward for next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we have another delegation this morning, and it is the Red River Planning District Bylaw Enforcement Update. And Councilor Horvis, if you can please excuse yourself, thank you. And you can just shut that door if you don't mind. Thank you. Good morning, Derek. How are you today?
Morning, Mayor. Do you want to present?
Yeah, I have a little PowerPoint. I got the
Okay, I'll shut right off there.
just take a moment, I guess, for it just to talk about that.
Okay, if you're ready, you can just go right ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thanks for having me over. As you're well aware, DRM gave us this assignment to delve into, so I thought I'd just give you a bit of a Coles Notes presentation on the memo that I provided to council ahead of today. So, back in the wintertime, DRM and both the RRPD received a number of petitions from some stakeholders in Nebo. The petitions were all the same, but they all outlined some requests, which I've summarized on the board in front of you. One is to enforce a past conditional use application from 2009. Another one was related to legal properties, being in compliance with applicable bylaws, and finally to implement the past initial findings from the legal secondary plan. So we've taken a look at this topic and wrestled with it a little bit, and have come up with some findings for you, some background research, and what we think are maybe some next steps for council to consider here. So just a bit of background. I think we all know where Lebo is. It's sort of at the corner of 59 and 317. It's about 160 acres in area. It is a settlement center in the district's development plan, which is a settlement center is typically an urban area where you find a full gamut of community amenities, whether that's various different types of residential, commercial, institutional uses, like schools and hospitals and government buildings, that sort of things, employment opportunities, that sort of stuff. But settlement center is also given to a few different areas within our district that don't have all of those characteristics, but they have a community type of vibe to it. Lebo being one of those, Grand Marais being another type of an area, Denauder being another area like that. Once again, not the full municipal services you see in an urban setting, but there's a community that's been established. So a bit of a timeline when we look back at some of the different files and went through some research. In 2010, there was a resolution passed by council, essentially said that the bylaw enforcement of the subject property that was outlined in the petition, it's rule number 517200, that's located along Road 32 East, to be put on hold until a secondary plan is completed for Lebo. And then in 2013, the legal secondary plan project was started. In 2014, there was an open house, I believe it was at the casino, that presented some initial research findings. And then the legal plan kind of stopped or put on hold. I wasn't part of that at that time, but sort of paused at that moment. In 2017, the River Planning District started the update of the development plan. For those of you who were on the board and were around as past council, you'll recall that there was a development plan that covered 4 of our municipalities, and then there was a separate development plan for East St. Paul and a separate development plan for Denauder. And in 2017, we started on a project to bring everything under the fold of one development plan and an updated development plan reflecting current standards and provincial policies. And then in 2020, we finally got the approval from the province to approve our development plan. So that's been in place for a few years now. And it's important to note that in terms of the planning policies that are in place, the development plan is at the top of that hierarchy. So any other initiatives that come after that have to adhere to that development plan, whether it be a secondary plan, a zoning bylaw, an area structure plan, anything like that, it has to adhere to that development plan. So my guess is that the Lebo plan was put on hold because a new development plan was going to be coming in, and how do you know if it's going to adhere, sort of a chicken and egg type of scenario. So that's where we're at today. So we had a look through the petition that was responded to the municipality as well as to the planning district. Looked through all those different concerns and topics that were brought up, as well as some additional ones that were brought up by staff as well as council from the RM and from the planning district. And there's a lot of intertwined topics here, which just adds to the complexity of this scenario. But what I've done just to try and simplify things is to organize all these topics into 5 categories, which I'll provide a little brief overview of. So those 5 categories are, as on the screen here, sort of some non-permitted uses or businesses in Nebo, future development of land, undeveloped roadways, I'll say right-of-ways, a secondary plan, and then bylaw enforcement. So in terms of non-permitted uses, it doesn't show up super great on the screen. You can maybe kind of make out some red circles there. There are some non-permitted businesses that are currently operating in Nebo. And by non-permitted, I mean it doesn't adhere to the zoning bylaw. So it doesn't have approvals under the zoning bylaw to operate. There might be some others if we took a really fine-tooth comb to going through every single property, but these are the big hitters that we've identified out there. So when we look at this, I think the basic question that comes up is, should these businesses be allowed to continue in Nebo or not? You know, and how would you allow those? Well, you'd allow them through a rezoning approval process. So should that even be allowed? And maybe a point to consider is that I would say right now there's not a clear answer on if that should be allowed or not. And I'll say from a policy perspective, there's not a clear answer. So what might help aid in getting a clear answer? Well, maybe some sort of detailed land use planning exercise might help inform where different uses should go, where might be appropriate things, what might be mitigating factors for negative impacts. In terms of future developments, Nebo already had a number of areas that were designated for future developments, and through the update of the development plan a couple years ago, there were some more areas added. In total, I believe we have about 65 acres that could be developed in Nebo. But once again, questions arise that I think of from a planning perspective of what types of future developments should take place on these lands. Remember, this is a settlement center policy area, and the settlement center policy area outlines that a number of different types of community type of uses are allowed, whether that be various types of commercial, various types of residential, various types of institutional. So if you're going to make a decision on where things should go and what should go where, how do you know which those should go? So once again, what type of development land use should be allowed? And then further to that, where should future roadways and accesses be located? Do future new roadways and accesses need to be located somewhere? These are some engineering questions that sort of come up. Once again, maybe a detailed land use planning exercise might lead to some of those, answering some of those questions. In terms of undeveloped roadways, when we look at Nebo, there are a number of what I'll say right-of-ways. They're legal right-of-ways. They've never been developed. So in land titles, you can see that there's a right-of-way, whether they're back lanes or roads that are, I'll say, on the books, so to speak. They've just never been improved or developed. There's no asphalt down, but they're all there. They're all owned by the municipality. And from the air photos, and I'll say the air photos aren't 100% correct in terms of air photos lining up with property lines that we have. You have to get land surveyors to determine exactly. But they're not that far off, you know, a foot or two off maybe at some points. From reviewing those air photos, it looks like a lot of different landowners are occupying those undeveloped right-of-ways, those back lanes and those roads, either for vehicle parking, storage, building placement, we've seen sheds and those kinds of things. Even people using driveways. They've established their driveways on back lanes or municipal right-of-ways. So when I look at those, once again, from a planning and a policy perspective, should some of those undeveloped right-of-ways be closed and amalgamated with adjacent properties? Maybe they're not useful anymore, you know? What we have found, what I've seen throughout Manitoba, is that way back in the day, and I mean like at least 100 years ago, surveyors used to go out and establish communities. They would just do a blanket survey and would establish all these grid patterns of lots and rear lanes and all those sorts of things. You see them all over Manitoba. I'm guessing that's probably the history of Lebo too. That's probably why we see some of these back lanes that, why would you have them, and they're not useful. I can think of another example that I've just been dealing with this past week. In East St. Paul, just south of the perimeter, there's a whole schwack of back lanes that people have been using forever as their backyards, and we're going through a process of trying to close those because they're just not useful. So should they be closed? If so, which ones? Do you need to retain some of those for future development? I don't know. I can't answer that. Once again, maybe some sort of planning exercise might shed some light on that. So in terms of a secondary plan, Lebo secondary plan project was started, as I said, and there was a public consultation event in 2014 that outlined some initial findings, but there is no actual plan. There's no plan in place to show where future development should go, where future roads should go, any overarching policies that should take place. There's not even a draft of it. From what I can see, everything kind of stopped at that open house. After that point, I didn't see any progress from any files that I could muster up. So once again, thinking from a planning perspective, because that's sort of my wheelhouse, I come to two relevant questions of, is 2014 research findings even still relevant? I mean, they're 9 years old now, so we've gone through a few elections, we've gone through a bunch of different development, we've gone through different economic changes, we've gone through different provincial initiatives, we've gone through different census gathering periods. So I'm not even convinced that they're still relevant. Maybe they are, but I wouldn't be willing to take that on face value just from a professional perspective.
And the development plan.
And the development plan has come up. So that's right, there are more lands in Lebo that are designated for future development that weren't contemplated in 2014. So there's that to all take into the mix. And then the other question that I always have is a secondary plan even the right tool to use? Now, secondary plans came in as a tool in the Planning Act by the provincial government, I want to say about 15 years ago or so. They're a great tool, but as the saying goes, like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. There's a whole bunch of other tools out there for planning a community, and I'm not convinced that, at least right now, that a secondary plan is the tool that you need for Lebo, because I don't know what the issues are, I don't know what the vision is, and also I don't know what the background research actually says, because once again, it's over 9 years old. So maybe there's some other tool out there that we need to use. Maybe there's a economic development plan. Maybe it's a subdivision shadow plan. Maybe it's a engineering roadway plan and servicing plan. There's all sorts of regulatory and non-regulatory planning tools that are used across the country to solve the problem of how should a community grow and develop into the future. The development plan is a secondary plan is just one of those tools. So before I ever suggest to a council or a client or whoever it is of which tool to use, I want a good feed on what the problems are, what the issues are, what the challenges and opportunities are, and what you're trying to achieve. Because I hate to see a municipality or a community go through a multi-year expensive exercise on something that may or may not get you what you're trying to achieve. So, and the last thing is bylaw enforcement. There was a suggestion to go through Alivo and clean up everything, go through bylaw enforcement. Bylaw enforcement, part of this, we always say, it's really easy to break the rules, it's real difficult to enforce the rules. There's a whole legal process we have to go through. All it takes is a thought for someone to break a rule, but those of you who are on the board and have seen the bylaw enforcement reports, there's a whole legal process that we have to go through so we can never be challenged. That being said, also, it's not our practice to go through a community and do a survey of an area, go out looking for bylaw enforcement complaints. We just don't actively patrol. We don't have the resources, whether that just be time or staff to do that. And I would hazard to guess that if we were to do that, we would probably find that most properties are an infraction of some sort of bylaw, local bylaw. Some of them might be more egregious in terms of doing a land use that's not permitted, and some of them might be, I don't know if you want to say less egregious, of it's an unkept property and there's weeds and the grass is too long, that kind of stuff, right? So, yeah, so go through that, but the questions that arise of, does the municipality have specific bylaw enforcement complaints they want to pursue? What are the big hitters that you want us to go have a look at? And then on that, what level of resources do you want to commit to looking at all of those different things? And from what I understand, there have been some bylaw infractions, and there have been a number of bylaw enforcement processes that have gone through over the past few years, whether it be from your organization or our organization, bringing things into correction. In terms of next steps, so just thinking on, you have these five sort of categories of topics, and remember, they're all intertwined. You deal with one, you affect another one. Use the example of these roadways. So if you close a roadway, is that going to affect how future development can take place on a piece of land? If you approve a rezoning of a piece of land, is that going to affect where a future roadway should go or affect a neighboring property? We don't know. There's not enough information for us to give you solid answers on some of those things. So what do you do on that, and how do you deal with enforcement complaints now? And also, just to throw another monkey wrench into the mix, as council is well aware, we're all dealing with now for a good year now, Bill 37 that the province put in, where almost any decision that you make can be challenged to municipal board, whether you approve something or reject something. Different parties can, it depends on the application, but different parties can appeal those to municipal board, where then you are put on the hot seat to defend your decision. And I would always say the best way to defend your decision is to base that in policies that are already established. So if you were to approve a rezoning and local stakeholders say we don't like that idea, you got to defend that. If you were to reject a rezoning and the applicant doesn't like that, you might have to go defend that as well. And I would say, what are you basing that on? Right now, the only policy that I can see in that area is the development plan, here at the top of the hierarchy, which is broad policy. Generally says, here's where communities are going to be developed, there's where agriculture is going to be, here's where industrial is going to be. Illegal, it says settlement center. And what can fit in a settlement center? Residential, single family, multifamily, commercial, retail, professional businesses, employment opportunities, light industrial, warehousing, that sort of thing. Institutional uses, schools, churches, government offices, that kind of stuff. So what fits in those areas? Everything. What doesn't fit? Well, probably everything too. Right? There's no other level of planning policy that you have at that moment to really hone in those goalposts. What would be appropriate, where and when and how. So thinking about that and thinking about, you probably need some time to get all this stuff together so you can have good information, make the right decisions. We put together some next steps. Now, it's not an exhaustive list. I'm sure there's some other ideas out there, but this is the best I can think of for right now based on what we have. And there's some short-term and some long-term sort of actions. So let me take you through those. It's all detailed in the memo that you have if you want to have more questions on this. I'm going to deal with the long-term actions first. So if you really want to be on, what and how should be developed in this area into the future, you probably want to undertake some sort of planning exercise. But step one would be, like I said, from that 2014 open house on the legal secondary plan. Is that background research even relevant? Is it still relevant today? Are there other issues that need to be identified? Are there other opportunities? Are there other factors that need to be identified? So I would say you need to conduct some research first and foremost, whether that be statistical analysis to determine growth rates, land use inventories, market demand analysis for new developments, local improvement cost benefit analysis, like all those different things you need to bring into the mix. Speak with some of the stakeholders there. Almost go through a review of what happened in 2013, 2014 to try and figure out, is that stuff still relevant, or are there new things emerging? And you might also want to obtain some quotes for undertaking a planning exercise. So once you have some research in place, you can identify what the issue is, what the goals are, and then you can start identifying what's the best planning tool to undertake. Once again, maybe it's a secondary plan. I have no idea. Maybe it's a concept plan or some of those other things that I talked about. So that'd be the second thing to do as those long-term actions. So as a note, just kind of in the red there, these actions could provide some information on how to address development. What existing right-of-way should remain, what should be closed, where should new right-of-way connections be located. Remember, everything goes onto a provincial road or a provincial highway in this area, so you need the province's input. And where should new land uses be located, whether they're residential, commercial, or what have you. So that's the long term. In terms of short-term actions, we can say, yeah, let's continue on some bylaw enforcement. Absolutely. That's always something that we're doing. That's always something that you're doing. But if there are specific items of concerns or complaints, maybe have a look at all those, prioritize them, and as we have done with St. Clements in the past, as we do with all our municipalities, we can put together an action plan to attack those or address them. So the other issue related to the non-conforming business on the main road there, the truck trailers, that sort of thing, which our councilor has lots of room for. Once again, you could not allow it to be there, or you could allow it to be there with the rezoning. But either one of those decisions, and once again, speaking from a policy perspective, I don't know what the correct decision would be because I don't have all the facts. I don't think you're going to have all the facts until you do a planning exercise for this area. So what do you do in the interim? Well, one suggestion that I have for you is that the property owner could apply for a variance to allow that business to continue on a temporary basis. Now, the basic tenet in the Planning Act is that you can vary all sorts of things, but you cannot vary land use. You can vary how far a building can be to a property line. You can't vary land use. So you can't say, I have a single family house, I want to vary it to allow for multi-family. You can't do that. You can't vary anything that's not already in the zoning bylaw. Except, there is this exception under section 97, if it's for a temporary basis. Maximum of 5 years, that's what you get. And I only normally recommend that councils do this in extraordinary circumstances. We've dealt with one in St. Andrews, where there was a use as a conservation office that had been there for forever. It was zoned completely incorrectly in the past zoning bylaw. They wanted to do an addition, and we said, we can't issue permits on this because it's not allowed to be there. Well, you're doing a new zoning bylaw. That's right, we are. It's not going to be ready for a while. Why don't you use this clause as a temporary means until that other thing gets completed? Same thing in this scenario. You could extend this to the property owner and say, you could apply for a variance, only good for a maximum of 5 years, and you can place conditions on that variance approval if you want. And that affords council some time to get those other longer term things together, that background research, that planning exercise, and then you have the foundation of making a correct, permanent decision of where should future commercial, where should future residential go, and under what parameters. So it allows it to operate, it allows you to, for 5 years, it allows you to put some conditions on there, whether it be for cleanliness or keeping the property orderly, that sort of thing. And it gives you time to do that good background research you need to do to make permanent decisions for legal. Rather than making a snap judgment right now, which once again can be appealed to the municipal board, and you have to go defend. The municipal board can overrule something, right? So that's what we have for you to think about. In there we also have some next steps, very specific things. If you want to pursue these past resolutions, they'll look like this, all that kind of stuff. But that's it in a nutshell. So if council had any questions, I'm happy to answer them. As I said, I'm sure there's other ideas out there that I haven't thought about, but this is the best that we could figure out this moment.
Yeah, I'm just gonna open it up to see for council if they have any questions, and I see Council Boulanger, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment to Mr. Planner. Thank you for putting that together. It's very detailed, it's very organized, and it gives a good road plan as to where it came from, where it's going, and how it can be addressed. So it's very good.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
Well, Derek, I've got to ask you a tough question. Don't want to get out of here too easy on. So, thank you for putting this together. There's two things that I guess, my question is based on how does this plan affect, we're looking at redoing the zoning bylaw in the near future. And in a blink of an eye, we'll be doing the development plan amendment again. So how do those three processes relate to each other?
No, good question. Tough one too. Thank you for on a Tuesday morning. That's not finished my tea yet. So planning is always an exercise of throughout time of coming up with plans and revisiting them and redoing them and correcting courses. I don't know of any municipality anywhere in the world that has hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on all sorts of consultants to say, we want in the next 3 years on the go date to have our development plan, our secondary plans, our zoning bylaws, our enforcement bylaws, all that stuff ready to go right away. The reality is municipalities just don't have those resources. You've never been given them, right? So you do your best with what you have. Now, we have a development plan right now, and it's in force, and yes, we're gonna have to update it, or at least have a review of it in a few years. And we know with the capital region still working on their plan, I don't know, I've sort of lost interest in that process, but working on Plan 2050, that's going to have some impacts to St. Clements and all the municipalities around the capital region. That will impact our development plan, you betcha. I don't see that, though, affecting the Lebo area. Quite frankly, the high development pressure areas are going to be, I'll say, within proximity of the perimeter highway, if that makes sense. That's just where all the policies are leading. That's where, as I see, all the provincial investments are leading to. I don't see anything that provincial plan has is going to grossly affect anything in your northern part of the municipality, whether that be Lebo or Moray, right? So I don't see that affecting it. In terms of the zoning bylaw, we're working on that right now. I'm looking forward to coming back and talking to you some more with some more pointed questions. I get to turn the tables on you and ask you guys some difficult questions. I'm just going to hone in what I need to be doing to make the right tool for you. But the zoning bylaw is going to have a, remember, zoning bylaws are not a visioning document. They don't plan communities. Development plans, secondary plans, those plan communities. Zoning bylaws are a regulatory tool to implement those plans. So it almost doesn't matter what I come up with in a zoning bylaw. It would not affect the planning of Nebo or any other area. What it will have is a range or a menu of different zones that would be available to all the areas of the municipality, as well as a range of different bulk regulations, setbacks, heights, those kinds of things. So you'd have that tool waiting in the wings for Lebo once you have a vision of what you want, and then you'd be able to say, well, this residential zone fits in Lebo and that one doesn't. So that's what we can rezone there, or as you have. So just like we see in some of our municipalities, I'll use West and East St. Paul, for example. They're going to have a range of different zones for residential, from higher intensity multifamily, all the way down the gamut to 5-acre rural residential lots. Those are just tools, but they have in place a development plan and secondary plans that say, these are the rural areas of our municipality. Great. You can take those rural residential zones and park them over there. Here's where we have water and sewer, and here's where we want multifamily. Great, we're going to take these multifamily zones and we can park them over there. That's what I would envision a similar process with Lebo. Come up with a plan, and then you already have these zones in place that you can then say, oh, these 3 fit or 4 fit, the others don't. Is that going to make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Vision.
Not too bad on a quarter cup tea, so.
Pretty good.
Anybody else have any questions at this point from council? Go ahead, Councillor Strang.
I just want to ask the development plan. We need that first then, because that's at the top of the,
You already have it.
we already have it.
We already
But
have it.
is it getting changed though? But you said it's not getting changed for Lebo.
No, it's not on my work plan. My priorities in 2018 and 2019 were to amalgamate all the municipalities into one development plan that's updated with policies. My priorities right now are to work on zoning bylaws for all 5 of our municipalities. And then after that, we'll see. We have to do a review of the development plan to see if we even need to update it. I don't imagine anything drastically changing for Lebo in terms of the development plans.
Just I'm sure that the council of the day, this secondary plan, that's what they had for tools and that's what was given to them to use to the best of their ability at that time. But yeah, so we'll have to have a re-exercise on that.
Yeah.
As a gym.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, what I would suggest, and then I'm a little more cautious or conservative, I guess you could say, is I like to form my advice and direction and planning based on facts and the realities, right? So we did some background research in 2013, 2014. I think you should revisit that, see if it's still relevant. As I said, see if there's some other things. Then once we have a look at that, then we know what the issues and opportunities and problems and constraints are, and then we can advise probably what the best tool is. Along with that, what's the most economic tool? I think I was in St. Andrews and they were asking about secondary plans. They said, well, how much do they cost? Which is always a loaded question, right? Well, it depends what you want. So I would say anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, depends on what you want to do. Now, is that the best tool? I don't know. Depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Well, like you said earlier, a planning exercise is what needs to be done. A planning exercise where you sit down and discuss what's the planning direction.
And that's all I would
for
keep
Lebo.
right now. A planning exercise, let's define what the tool is later.
Right.
Secondary plans were the flavor of the day, I'll say a decade and a half ago. That was the only tool that most people knew about. We have way more now. And something might be, if I can think of something that still get you what you need, that can be faster and more efficient and cheaper, why wouldn't we go that way, right? Anything else?
One last
Go
question.
ahead, Councilor
Correct me if
Boulanger.
I'm wrong, a secondary plan, in my mind, just hearing the word secondary plan, is a plan that comes after a development plan, or a plan that comes after you have something that you started with and you want to look at it secondarily, you want to develop on it, you want to expand it, you want to broaden it.
So you can think about multiple layers of rules. So a development plan is at the top of the hierarchy.
Yes.
And it is broad for our entire district, all 5 municipalities. And we'll generally say, that's agriculture over there, this is a community over here, and that's about it. It has some broad general things, and has some guidance and rules for rezonings, and for secondary plans, that sort of thing. So that's at that top level. Secondary plans come below that. It's another layer. So when you're looking at, let's say, a subdivision application, you look at the development plan policies. That might speak about, this area over here should be serviced with municipal sewer, let's say. And then you're gonna look at secondary plan layer, and it might say, yeah, that's gonna be a community, has to be with sewer, but this specific area is supposed to be reserved for multifamily. You know, it gets down to those level details where it can. And a secondary plan, I guess, I'll just the Cole's notes of it, it is more specific than a development plan for a very specific finite geographical area.
Right. And the point, the reason I'm bringing it up is, like as you said, and it was a good point, the flavor of the day back then, because I remember being around when that was happening, that the secondary plan was thought that it would be a good thing to do. It was very finite, it was looking at legal very macroly.
Yeah.
Was it the right thing to do? I don't know, but generally what I'm getting at is a secondary plan usually comes after you have an idea. But the flavor of the day, whether it be right or wrong, looking at it now, you can't hang your hat on a secondary plan that was done that long ago because it was the flavor of the day. You know what I'm getting at? It may not have been the right tool 10 years ago to do it that way, but it was for some reason.
There's more things that we can do now, and my general rule of thumb when it comes to should you do a secondary plan or not, or is it the right tool or not, I think secondary plans are a fantastic planning tool when you're dealing with some sort of complexity. And I mean that from a technical standpoint. Not something that, not a complexity that, you know, the average person can't get their head around. I mean from a technical standpoint. How do you take a broad 500 acres of land and address new development that's going to include parks and pathways and schools and religious facilities and commercial and single family and multifamily and townhouses and apartments and roadways and drainage and heights and pressures and gradients? How do you deal with all that and connect up to provincial roadways, and where should all those things? That's a really complex technical exercise. Another complexity that I've dealt with is in Winnipeg. I laugh because I worked on a secondary plan in Winnipeg probably about 18 years ago, and I think the 4th version of it now getting worked on right now. There's lands out by the Mints. And the complexity there isn't necessarily from a land use or engineering perspective. The complexity there is there are 3 major landowners, and where the connection of major sewers to go kind of converge where all their land comes. And so who should pay for that? Which major developer? That's a complexity as well, right? In St. Andrews, about 5 years ago, I was asked the question, should we do a secondary plan? And I said, what's the complexity? What do you want? Well, we kind of want what we already have, what's already established, and just continue on that path. Well, there's no complexity there. What you need is a shadow plan for engineering to dictate where the major road connection should go, where there's a gap in between, where sewer and water should come from, and outline basic lot sizes. That's not a secondary plan. You could save you $100,000 on that. So What's the complexity? What are you trying to achieve?
Okay.
What's all the background factors? Let's gather that first.
Okay, anything else from members of council? Okay, I know we do have a few people in the audience that I'm sure came to listen to this presentation. Although no one has registered to speak or ask questions, I will put it out there. If you want to ask a question of the planner, you are allowed to do so. I do not want to get into a debate with anybody, and if that happens, I will ask you to cease and desist, and that will be the end of the meeting at that point in time. So, anybody want to, Carl, did you have
Absolutely.
anything that you want to say?
If you're gonna open up another plan, okay, and you're gonna make reapplications for this, if we haven't followed the rules of the initial application that was set out and the terms of the agreement, how are we gonna follow the second one? All we're doing is buying time here.
Derek, can you answer that?
Sir, what application are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the application in 2008 for a conditional use permit to allow 20 trailers on agricultural land, and it is now exploded to 150.
So that was never approved by council or rejected?
Oh, yes, it was approved by council. Oh, yes.
Yeah, there was a variance that was approved by council.
Yes, it was.
Are you talking about the conditional use application?
That's right.
8 of 2009?
Right, you know, if the mayor could turn around and just read the stipulations for the approval of that application.
We do not have the application before us. What I'm looking at is the same thing that is on the screen, and it's the first bullet point. A past conditional use application, CU number 8, 2009, and the related property bylaw enforcement. I don't have the conditional use application on the computer or on my desk.
I guess kind of where we're going with this was, they were supposed to obtain permission from the Department of Highways to access that properties with semis entering and exiting that property. That was never done. There were supposed to be 20 trailers on that property. Now, if there was 20 trailers on that property to this date, not one person would be here discussing this. But there's not. There is a garbage dump on there. We have people living in the grain elevator, and they're Dave Horvis's employees.
I don't think we should be getting into anything like that.
Okay, absolutely, no, we'll leave that alone, but like I say, we can put all the rules and regulations forth, but if no one agrees to follow them, what good are they? And if no one wants to enforce them, as a community, we can't grow we won't get $1 put into that town until this mess is cleaned up. We've got diesel spills.
So if I could, Madam Mayor, and
Go
the
ahead.
question is to the planner. You made a presentation in there, you said secondary, as part of the conditional use application of 2009, that was identified in there, that there was a decision made that enforcement of that conditional use by Red River Planning would be held off until a secondary plan or some other level of planning was to be conducted. So that's what was happening. So that bylaw enforcement related issue was held up at that time, from what I'm understanding. And so since then, there was that secondary plan work, and then the development plan, and then the issues related with trying to get this done. If any kind of an approval happens, because it was bylaw, there was a decision made in the past from previous council that said with the Red River Planning saying to hold off any bylaw enforcement related with that land use until there was an appropriate planning tool to be able to use.
Yep.
And that's why now if a variance is granted and or restricted or whatever, that is enforceable?
A variance? Yes, absolutely. So a variance or a conditional use, you can add conditions to it. And if at any time the applicant does not adhere to those conditions, council then has the right to pull the approval, which then you enter into a bylaw enforcement type of process. So my understanding of the past application, 2009, was that that application came up, came to council, there was a public hearing, but there was no actual decision or approval on that. Couldn't find an actual resolution approving it. What I could find was a resolution after the fact that said, just as you stated to our office, hold off on any bylaw enforcement. We were going to do a secondary plan to figure out which way is up in this area. So don't do any action until that secondary plan is done. So in the next steps that I outlined in the memo, there's some things in there for council to have a look at in terms of giving us authorization to go forward with doing some things. So to your earlier point, yes, if the variance were to be approved for a temporary timeline and someone did not adhere to the conditions of it, then council has the documentation to go after that.
And to be clear, the municipality relies upon Red River Planning to be the interpreter and to be the enforcement agency that determines the decisions related with conditional uses, variances.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So many people will have different interpretations of what they've seen on a council agenda or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that Red River Planning has been tasked under legislation to make those decisions.
That's right.
And that's what you're telling us right now.
That's right.
So in short, none of it will be enforced. Is that what you're saying?
It's not what I said at all.
That's not what he said. But this is, as the mayor said, this wouldn't be the venue for the debate, but the point is, Red River Planning went in and investigated and determined that the conditional use, there was a decision made on that conditional use that there wouldn't, the enforcement, bylaw enforcement by Red River Planning wouldn't be done until some other level of planning could be done. And then that other level of planning, like, you know,
I'm listening.
you can be upset by it, but the point is, it was a decision that was in the past, and we're trying to find a way to move forward.
Yeah, so maybe if I
As
could
part of
rephrase
this-
it a different way, Deepak. Past decisions of past councils put a hold on any kind of enforcement or planning for that area. But what I put forward in this memo are some ideas for this current council on how they might want to move forward in planning and, by extension, enforcement of the area.
So these are the big points that you had identified in your memo from what I'm understanding. In 2010, the RM Council passed a resolution outlining that the bylaw enforcement of the property be on hold until a secondary plan is completed for legal. In 2013, the legal secondary plan project was started. In 2014, an open house was presented. In 2017, RPD started the RPD development plan update, which meant the secondary plan was put on hold because the development plan was asked for, or was legislated. So let me be clear here. So you're legislated to do a development plan?
The province requires us to review and or update every 5 years.
Okay, so the legislative plan required it in 2017, which meant the secondary plan study that was being done was put on hold until you could learn better what was happening
Exactly.
in
It could just be moved.
the development plan. And then in 2020, that development plan was adopted. And then the development plan expanded many areas that were in dialogue with the community to add in more development, which is what everybody was identifying that needed to be done. And then the secondary plan has to be in conformance, so that was the next step.
Yeah.
And that you've identified in here that due to various reasons, there was some delays in getting that part done by Red River Planning. And with this review, you've come back with some recommendations. And in this report, you've also recommended to us, or for the administration to bring forward for council, next steps here, to pass resolutions to get this going as soon as possible, immediately, so that we can get going and resolving these issues. So that's what my understanding is from what I'm reading on the memo.
That's right, yeah, so past decisions, as I said, were made through resolutions that we were abided by, or we had to abide by, and there's some next steps for, as you noted there, for some ideas and resolutions for this council. If they want to move forward, which we'd be obligated to abide by, so.
I guess where I'm confused in the whole matter is that the Red River Planning Board was the one that rejected it to begin with, but it was council that passed it against their recommendations.
Yes,
Yes, so,
and that happens on many occasions.
Okay.
And that's
So
why you
how
have
many-
many levels. There's, if you would let me finish, sir.
okay,
So there are many levels of approvals and things that happen on land use. Red River Planning writes reports that come forward to council. Public hearings happen. As part of the public hearing, council makes a decision based on the information that's given. One aspect is the Red River Planning. That's not the board, so let me be clear here. So Red River Planning district staff, the professional planners write reports for council to review. They look at that from a policy perspective, okay? So on a policy perspective, policy may not be as up to date. They would say, as per the existing policy, we're recommending rejection or approval or whatever it is. Okay, it goes both ways. And council then listens and then makes a determination at that time as part of the public hearing process as legislative. Okay, and at that point, council can take the recommendations of Red River Planning or take the recommendations of what they listen to the public and through their dialogue make a decision. That decision then goes to the board. The board is someone else, and it depends on the type of project. The type of approval goes to a board. And so some of those go to the Red River Planning Board, and they could overrule whatever council has said on some of those. Some of those, on top of that, that go to the board, even though you could have the council approve something against the recommendations of the planners. You could have the board approve something against the recommendations of the planner, and it goes up even further on some applications that is really dealing with like development plans and secondary plans and those kind of things. It goes up to the province, and then they review it, and they look at it, and that is just part of the legislative framework that allows to check and balances. But at the end of the day, local authority to make decisions sits with councils, and then certain applications sit with the board, certain applications sit with the province as the final authority on it. In the last little bit of changes that the planner has talked about today is the Bill 37, which has brought in an additional level of authority, which is that sitting at the council, whereas the local authority, that there will be certain types of applications that will also be appealable to a municipal board.
I got that part.
Okay, so that's the way it works. So you were asking the question, what happened? I'm saying, back in 2009 or 10,
Okay, so after you granted it, okay, and permission was given, and you put stipulations in there, not one of them was ever followed.
I think I've already stated it wasn't granted. And I've already stated that there was a decision the council made to hold off on the level of enforcement. So whatever those conditions were, those were proposed conditions to be put forward. Am I correct, Mr. Plowden?
Yeah, so I think you might be referring to a report that came from our office, as Deepak said. We provide a recommendation, and it's a narrow focus. It's just on the available planning policies. And what I always say to council is, what do we recommend for or against something? That's just on this narrow focus. You as council have to take into account a bunch of other pieces of information, provincial input from the applicant, input from residents and other stakeholders, economic factors, health and safety factors, engineering factors, this whole breadth of things, and sort that out and make a decision. I don't envy your sitting in those chairs, right? I get to just say, these are like dragging it, these are the facts, that's all it is, you can make a decision. In our recommendation, we also listed a number of conditions. Where we said, look, council, if you are gonna approve this, here's a number of conditions we think you should make applicable to this approval, if you approve it.
Mhm.
The approval never came. Council did not approve that application. That application's just sitting there. What council did do, like, I don't know, months later, is they passed this other resolution that said, you know what, just put a hold on everything here. We don't want to force anything, just put a hold, because we're going to do a secondary plan. So before we make any permanent decisions, we want to go through that secondary plan process.
So in
that-
fact, the application is still open.
As far as I can see, yeah, I think from what I can tell, yeah, and I can double check, absolutely. From what I can tell, the application was made, circulated for public hearing, our office, our planners made recommendations, it went to, there was a public hearing held with council, I believe the public hearing was closed, and then that was that.
So
There
someone,
was no actual decision made after that.
so what's going on in legal is just going on. There is no permission to do it. It was just done.
That'd be a fair way to say it, sure, it's just.
But there
going
was a
on.
resolution of council in 2010 that said,
That's it,
and
Just-
allow
just leave
this
it.
to occur for a period of time until something gets resolved.
So
I think all well intentioned.
is that just a variance?
No.
That, no?
That's a conditional
So that's
use.
just a condition, and that can be for indefinite, for as long as you guys want to have that on the board, so you don't have to deal with it.
A conditional use
No,
could be.
no. Wait,
What?
let me correct something here.
Okay.
This is not put on the board or, so that we don't have, the council does not have to deal with it. What the planner has explained very clearly is what were the circumstances as to how we got here. Whatever happened, it was not, nothing was intentional, I'm gonna be very, very clear on that.
Okay?
And
But
so,
where are we gonna go forward from here?
this is what
we
the
need to
recommendations
go.
are, the next steps. Pass a proper resolution, do this, and have a timeline established to get this work done. And with that timeline, requiring people to, what the recommendations of the planner in this report, let me see here. Number one is council pass the resolutions to get this done. Step two, those businesses that are there have an opportunity of one or two things to be in line with those resolutions.
Okay.
One is submit for either a rezoning application, because that's the right of every applicant.
Yep.
Any property owner has a right to do that, regardless of the legislation out there. The other is to get for variance so that you put it in a finite time. So that that use has a specific finite time. So when you say maximum of 5 years, that means if you get a decision made in less than 5 years,
Yeah, so
then they must adhere to it in less than 5 years.
So then that
So
would be
that
council's
would be-
responsibility
that would
then
mean-
to get it less
That
than
would
5
mean
years.
that once that timeline has passed, there is no appeal, there's no nothing, everything has to cease if you haven't resolved it. They say 5 years for the planners and the municipalities to do something.
So at what point did that 5 years start?
That would start now, that's the
Today.
thing,
So
because that's the
basically,
recommendation.
but basically you're saying that we have to live with this now for 5 more years.
No, I'm not, I just said, that's the maximum amount for to be able to do the study. The planner came back with recommendations saying they cannot make appropriate recommendations about doing the proper studies and the analysis to come forward. That's what they're asking for the resolutions of council to do that. That will cost time and money to do it. How fast it gets done will depend on the proper tool that gets established. And then,
I think that a lot has gotten lost here. We're not out to do anything like that, okay? I understand the guy's got a business there, but at the end of the day, there are rules and regulations that every one of us will follow. I go build a, you know what? I go build a house, I have to adhere to the rules and regulations before here. Well, at the end of the day, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you got 40 semis lined up, loading stuff up, and they're using it as a trucking terminal. That's a problem.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off here, because I think we've had enough discussion, and we know what your concerns are. And the gentleman sitting next to you, if you could just identify yourself, because you did speak and we need your name for the record.
Dan Bourrier,
How are you spelling the last name?
B-O-U-R-R-I-E-R.
Thank you. And I know Carl, so I'm gonna close it off for today. We're going to try and move forward, and I can only say it in the simplest terms. We're saying 5 years, perhaps, but if it gets done in 18 months, then we'll move forward. The maximum is 5 years, and I want you to understand that. And it doesn't mean that if somebody else wants to develop in Lebo, that they're going to be held back. The application has to be put in place, has to be made, it has to be processed. And if you want to subdivide your land next, in the fall, it'll come to council and it'll be dealt with.
But what I'm saying though is what you're saying here today is that in 5 years, that application that has been put forth for our counselor that operates on that property, that will cease and desist. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
If it's not adhered to, because there are certain, we did say in here that there are things that will be done by council, and I think Deepak is bringing it back up on the screen there, and you can read it up there. RM to inform property owners of non-conforming business that some options available to them at this time are to either, and then it lists them.
I just, like I say, it's very frustrating because it's such a long process to deal with, but we've been dealing with it for such a long time. You know what I mean? And I don't think it needs to take this long. I really don't. Like, we can go out and we can enforce these bylaws. We can tell someone to this day that they don't need to be doing that. He can go out and enforce a bylaw. We've had 2 other properties actually clean up a little bit out there, okay? But the main one, nothing.
Well, and that's something, and that is something that we can look at, and in all honesty, I would like to close it off. I believe that you've had your opportunity to.
And I do believe you're right, and I appreciate the opportunity, but like I say, there's not enough lead time.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
Just kind of close things off. So yeah, I can actually appreciate that there's been some issues going on for quite a long time for people. I think necessarily to the responsibility of anyone around this table and those decisions made in the past. But what's before you will be provided with is a path forward, on a new step. And I think the biggest thing, as I've outlined, is that it would probably behoove council to go through a process to figure out what is the grand plan for Lebo. Because right now, if anyone came forward to establish a business permanently, or to do a subdivision, which is a permanent decision, from a planning perspective, I don't have any answers for you if that's the right decision or not. So that's really what is the crux of this memo that I put forward. Do some background research, figure out what the issues, figure out what the opportunities are, come up with a plan, and then you have something that everyone is aware of, and then everyone knows what the plan is, and everyone can follow. That way, your decisions are justified when you make them. In terms of ongoing infractions, applicants can just stop. That's one of the things in there. They can just cease and desist. Council can do all sorts of things. But that option of variance is also just saying, in a legal way, I know there's resolutions put in the past, but in a legal way, you can say, let's just put a hold on this. Let's just kind of pause, cool our jets for the moment. Let's get that background research in place. Let's get that plan in place so that when you do make a permanent decision, you know that you're making the right one that's best for the entire community. So with that, if council has any other questions in the future, as always, you know where to find me. As I've always said, I'm sure with the pleasure of council, so you give us direction, we will move forward.
I just want to check, Councillor Strang, you did have your hand up. Do you still have something, or are you okay? You're okay? Okay.
Thank you very much.
And just want to address one last that I see in your paragraph there. The work will provide some insight into the planning tools needed to direct future development and legal, and it's so that what type of planning tool might be best, secondary plan, subdivision, concept plan, etc. It should be noted that RPD's Planning Service Department is happy to assist with the above noted work. However, with the other ongoing RPD priority projects, RPD board will need to authorize such involvement. So you'd like council's resolution to also be requesting RPD board to make sure that they direct the administration to do this?
Correct. I take my marching orders from the board, and the board right now has said, do those zoning bylaws, that's the priority. So if any one of our individual municipalities has a different priority they want to bring forward, please bring that forward in a resolution so that the board can hash that out and that we can decide, or they can decide how best to do it. Whether that's me doing it, or as I said, you might want to take some quotes, maybe from consultants to do part of this, all of this, whatever it might be, so.
Okay, thank you for
Thanks,
that,
Karen.
and thanks
Thank you,
very
ma'am.
much for coming in, the presentation and the conversation.
Anything else going on here?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Unless-
Just a reminder, we do have our board open house tomorrow between 3 and 6. You're welcome to pop by, and I was trying to get a dunk tank for Ryan to sit in, but Jennifer said no, so, you know, we don't have that.
So based on that, Madam Mayor, we have a resolution prepared for council.
Okay.
I'd like to read that.
Please.
Whereas Red River Planning District has provided an action plan to address long-standing issues in the legal related to land use, secondary planning, law enforcement, and municipal rights of ways. Excuse me. And whereas background research work in the legal area will provide some insight into if a planning tool is needed to direct future development of legal, and if so, the type of planning tool that might be best for legal, example, secondary plan, subdivision, concept plan, etc. Therefore, be it resolved, the CAO work with Red River Planning District to develop a scope of work to update the initial research findings that were presented at the 2014 legal secondary plan open house, and furthermore, be it resolved that the scope of work is brought back to council for approval, and furthermore, be it resolved that the CAO work with Red River Planning District to obtain quotes from qualified consultants to conduct or assist with the legal background research, and furthermore, be it resolved that the request be made to Red River Planning District Board that the RPD's Planning Services Department in assisting on the above noted work.
Okay, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Boulanger, Councillor Strang, seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, opposed, and that is carried. Okay, so we are now at our communication for action, number 5 on our agenda. And I'm not sure if you wanted to take 2 minutes or you want to keep plugging a little bit here.
If we could just take a minute to let Council Horwitz back in.
Oh, right, okay.
Heather's good.
Thank you, council.
Okay, good to see you, dear.
See you.
I need to go get some coffee, I'm sorry.
Yes, we can take 5 minutes.
I guess the recording is not.
That's fine. Just 5 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm when our daycare shuts down. So whenever all that is, no, our two got but we almost live it's the same plant, canopy of paper, we got animals, the boar. Correct. No animals are.
Okay, it's okay, 2 minutes.
Just shut the camera off for a minute.
Yeah.
So if you were to go past Tim Hortons east, here comes St. Louis right in a mile or 2, you would go right, so you're going south.
It was fine after
And the fourth property
I came back to work in my back's good.
Yeah.
It's telling me something.
And that's why, hey,
It was.
and that's why, so we were too far.
With better.
Couldn't, yeah.
And said the way